You won't believe what happened when I discovered my neighbor, an HOA Karen, dumping chemicals into my pool. It all started innocently enough. I was just minding my business, enjoying the sunny weather, when I noticed something strange happening with the water in my pool. It was cloudy and had a weird smell. Curious, I checked the security footage and saw her, my neighbor, walking over with a bucket, tipping it into the water. What could it be? And why would she do that? Turns out, this wasn't just some random act of carelessness. It was a deliberate act of sabotage. She's one of those HOA Karen types, always trying to control everything, even my property. I'm no stranger to her complaints about my yard and pool, but this crossed a serious line. She didn't just talk behind my back, she actually harmed my property. I couldn't just let this slide. After a little digging and some conversations with the right people, I found out the chemicals she used were harmful and could have caused major damage. So, I did what any reasonable person would do. I filed charges, and let me tell you, the outcome was something I didn't see coming. Stay tuned to find out how this crazy situation ended and what happened to her in the end. I'd seen her around the neighborhood plenty of times, always with a scowl on her face, pointing out every tiny imperfection in the community. She was the kind of person who thought she had the right to control everyone's lives, especially when it came to how we maintained our properties. I never understood why she had it out for me, but it was clear from day one that she didn't like my pool. Maybe it was the way I kept it perfectly clean, or maybe she just couldn't stand the fact that I wasn't afraid of standing up for myself. Either way, her complaints were constant. At first, I thought maybe she was just one of those overly picky HOA members. You know, the type who thinks a lawn should be perfectly trimmed to the millimeter. But when she started leaving passive-aggressive notes on my door about my pool being too dangerous or unsightly, I knew something was off. I wasn't the only one who'd received her wrath. Several neighbors had warned me about her strange behavior, but no one had ever experienced anything like this before. When I saw her on the footage, I couldn't believe my eyes. She wasn't just criticizing me, she was actively trying to ruin my property. It didn't make sense. Why would someone go to such lengths over a pool? What did she have to gain? It was a mystery, but one I was determined to solve. Little did I know, the truth would be more twisted than I ever imagined. I couldn't shake the feeling that something more was going on. As I watched the footage again, I zoomed in on her face. There was no mistaking it. She was enjoying herself, like she was savoring the moment. It didn't make sense. Why go to all this trouble just over a pool? I decided to take a step back and try to piece together what had been happening in the neighborhood. Turns out, I wasn't the only one who'd had problems with her. As I spoke to more neighbors, the stories started to pile up. One woman told me she had tried to get her dog taken away because it barked too much. Another neighbor mentioned that Karen had once reported someone's fence as too tall, despite it being within the HOA guidelines. I began to see a pattern. It wasn't just my pool. She had a habit of targeting anyone who didn't fit into her narrow vision of what the neighborhood should be. But why now? What made this particular incident so extreme? I thought back to the past few weeks. Maybe it was something I had done. Maybe I'd finally crossed a line in her eyes. But no, I hadn't done anything differently. I'd been keeping to myself, enjoying my pool, and minding my own business. As the days passed, I couldn't ignore the fact that this was escalating. She wasn't just some annoying neighbor anymore. She was someone who was willing to destroy what I had worked for. But who else could she be targeting? Was anyone else at risk? The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about her wanting control. There had to be something deeper behind it all, something darker. As the days wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was as if Karen was always lurking, just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. The more I dug into her past behavior, the more disturbing it became. A few of the neighbors shared whispers about how she'd been obsessed with the idea of perfecting the neighborhood, a place where everything had to be pristine, just as she envisioned it. It almost seemed like she saw herself as the neighborhood's self-appointed ruler, and anyone who didn't conform was a target. I could feel the weight of that growing tension hanging in the air, thickening with each passing day. Then, one evening, I caught her in the act again. This time, I was ready. I'd been keeping an eye on her, watching for any signs she might do something else to my pool. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard, and I was just about to step inside when I noticed her approaching my property once more. But this time, she wasn't carrying the usual bucket. No, this time, she had something else in her hands, something small, something that could cause far more damage than any chemical. I froze, barely able to breathe. She didn't see me. I quickly ducked behind the corner of my house, heart racing. What was she planning? Was this going to be the final straw, the moment she'd gone too far? The silence around me was deafening, my mind racing through a dozen scenarios, each one worse than the last. The stakes had never felt higher, and I knew that whatever happened next would change everything. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next. Just as I was about to step forward and confront her, something unexpected happened. A car pulled into the driveway next door, Karen's house. But it wasn't just any car. It was a police cruiser. My heart dropped. What was going on? Was she calling the cops on me for some petty reason, like she had in the past? But something didn't feel right. The officers weren't just walking up to her door to chat. They were moving quickly, heading straight toward her backyard. I watched from my hiding spot, barely able to process what I was seeing. Karen seemed panicked, her face pale as she hurriedly tried to talk to them. But then she did something I never expected. She pointed straight at my house. The officers looked at me. No, they were looking at my pool. The one she'd poisoned with those chemicals. A cold wave of dread washed over me. Could this be connected? Was she trying to make me look like the culprit? My gut was telling me something wasn't adding up. Why would she be acting like this, as if she was the victim? The tension in the air was suffocating as the officers started inspecting my pool. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. Was this a game to her? Was she setting me up? Or had something even darker been brewing all along? I couldn't stand the suspense any longer. I had to know what was happening, and why it felt like my life was unraveling faster than I could keep up with. The officers walked around my pool, examining the water closely. My stomach twisted as I watched them, unsure of what they were thinking. Were they really about to accuse me of something I didn't do? I felt my heart racing as one of the officers pulled out a testing kit and began to check for any trace of the chemicals. Then they turned to me, their expressions hard to read. "I need to ask you some questions," one officer said, his voice calm but firm. I stood frozen, trying to gather my thoughts. Before I could respond, Karen stepped forward, trying to interrupt, but the officer held up his hand, signaling her to stay back. "Ma'am, this is a criminal investigation. Please step aside." My mind was spinning as they continued to test the pool, and that's when the real bombshell dropped. One of the officers looked at me, then at Karen, his expression hardening. "Ma'am, we have a warrant for your arrest." I stared at Karen, absolutely stunned. She had set me up. She had somehow managed to turn the tables and get the police involved, framing me for poisoning my own pool. But it didn't stop there. The officer revealed that the chemicals she had dumped in my pool weren't just random. They were toxic substances she had been using for months to secretly damage various properties in the neighborhood. They had traced a string of similar incidents, and it all pointed back to her. As Karen was led away in handcuffs, I felt a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. But just as the officers were leaving, one of them pulled me aside. "There's one more thing you should know. Your pool wasn't the first target." I was about to ask what he meant when he handed me a small, torn piece of paper. It was a list of names. My name was at the top. But beneath it, several others, neighbors I hadn't even realized had been targeted. And at the very bottom of the list, my own address, crossed out. The twist hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd been part of something much bigger than I'd ever imagined. Karen had been targeting not just me, but an entire community. What's more, she wasn't done yet. And as I watched her being driven away, I realized this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As the police drove Karen away, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. It felt like a twisted nightmare, but now it was over. The neighborhood was safe again, and I finally had some peace. Karen's scheme had been far bigger and more calculated than I ever imagined. The list the officer gave me was proof that she'd been planning these attacks for a long time, targeting anyone she saw as a threat to her perfect vision of the neighborhood. In the days that followed, I was left with mixed emotions. Part of me felt victorious. After all, I had fought back and exposed her for what she truly was. But another part of me was shaken by the realization that people like Karen existed, lurking in the shadows, using manipulation and control to harm others. It made me more aware of the things we take for granted, like a peaceful neighborhood and the freedom to live without fear of someone sabotaging your life. In the end, the charges stuck, and Karen was arrested for multiple counts of property damage and harassment. As for me, I learned to trust my instincts and never let anyone, no matter how perfect they seemed, have the power to dictate my life.